Today, Glorieta Pass is a lonely place, quiet except for the rumbling of traffic on I-25. But during the Civil War, it was the site of a bloody battle. I'm Jennifer Bonehoff, author of Valverde and Glorieta, historical novels set in New Mexico during the Civil War. And this is the story of some of the characters who fought at the Battle of Glorieta Pass. The Civil War might never have come to New Mexico had it not been for this man, Henry Hopkins Sibley. An 1838 graduate of West Point, Sibley had served in the Army for years, fighting in the Mexican-American War and against Seminoles in Florida and Navajos and Comanches in the West. He was also a creative man, inventing the Sibley tent and the Sibley stove, a design the U.S. Army continued to use into World War II. When the South seceded, this Louisiana native resigned his post at Fort Union on the Santa Fe Trail and catching a stagecoach made for Texas. As the coach passed through Albuquerque, Sibley opened the window and shouted at two Union soldiers, "Boys, I'm your worst enemy." Sibley went to Jefferson Davis and promised to take the southwestern territories for the Confederacy. He promised Davis the gold fields of Colorado and California's deep water ports. He promised to fulfill a manifest destiny to the South, stretching its borders from sea to shining sea. That would lead to more money for the South to finance the war, more respect from European powers, and possibly European alliances. Best of all, Sibley promised all this at no cost to the Confederacy. He claimed that he could arm his troops from the captured arsenal at Fort Bliss and that his army could live off the land. Davis was so impressed that he promoted Sibley to brigadier general. Colonel Edward Canby, the cautious commander of Union forces in the Department of New Mexico, feared Sibley's oncoming army. So many of Canby's regular army units had been called east that he had been forced to supplement his strength with militia and volunteers. Even then, protecting towns and settlements from Indian attacks stretched his forces thin. Canby concentrated his troops at Fort Craig on the southern boundary of the territory he held, then called north to Colorado for aid. William Gilpin, the first governor of the Colorado Territory, was anxious to help. When he found politicians back east had no interest in the West, Gilpin printed nearly $400,000 in unauthorized drafts on the federal treasury. These notes, which became known as Gilpin's script, financed the creation and equipping of the first Colorado volunteers, who were nicknamed Gilpin's pet lambs. He chose John Potts Slough, a lawyer who had moved to Colorado after being expelled from the Ohio General Assembly for striking another assemblyman, to lead the volunteers, and commissioned him as a colonel. Slough's cold demeanor and unwillingness to share the difficulties of camp life did not inspire loyalty in his troops, who would have mutinied many times had Major John Chivington, Slough's second-in-command, not talked them down. Chivington, a fiery Methodist minister and inspired orator, had once preached an abolitionist sermon with a pair of pistols beside his Bible to quell argument, and had earned the nickname the Fighting Parson. Slough began recruiting men, including Samuel Logan, a blacksmith who became locally famous when he climbed onto the roof of a mercantile business and tore down a Confederate flag, and Samuel Cook, a down-and-out miner who plastered the gold fields with posters that brought in a whole company of men, earning him a commission as captain. When the news came north that Sibley had defeated Canby at Valverde Ford, then taken Albuquerque, then Santa Fe, the Coloradans did the near impossible, marching sometimes upwards of 40 miles per day in near blizzard conditions to reach Fort Union before the Confederates did, and setting the stage for the battle that everyone knew was imminent, but no one expected to occur in Glorieta Pass. Glorieta Pass is a narrow divide through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the southernmost extension of the formidable Rockies. Since 1821, it had been the final leg of the Santa Fe Trail, which connected the territory's capital to Independence, Missouri. The pass was dotted with ranches whose owners supplemented their livelihoods by catering to travelers on the trail. They offered rooms for the night, meals, supplies, and a place to feed and water livestock and the horses and oxen that pulled the wagons. At the far east of the pass, Martin Kozlowski, an emigre from Warsaw who first came to New Mexico in 1853 to fight Apaches with the 1st Dragoons, owned a 600-acre spread that included a trading post, tavern, and rooms for travelers. Many of the buildings on his property were built with adobes and stones taken from the nearby abandoned Pecos Indian Pueblo. On the far west of the pass sat the ranch of Anthony D. Johnson, a Missouri native who made his living as a teamster transporting supplies to Fort Union, in addition to running the stagecoach stop and cantina at his ranch. But the busiest of the establishments sat in the middle of Glorieta Pass and was run by a Frenchman whose very name is a bit of a mystery. Some records call him Alexander Valle, but that might just mean he was the Alexander who lived in the valley. Other records call him Alexander Pigeon, and while Pigeon is a common French surname, some sources suggest that was a nickname caused by his strutting about like a pigeon at the many fandangos held at his establishment. Whatever his true name, his establishment, which still stands by the side of the road leading to Pecos, became the center of bitter fighting. When they arrived at Fort Union, the Coloradans, who had covered 400 miles in just 13 days, were surprised to find that the Confederates were still in Santa Fe. Colonel Canby's orders were for troops to hold Fort Union, which was under the command of Colonel Gabriel Paul. Although he was a volunteer and Paul was regular Army, Slow announced that he outranked Paul by virtue of date of rank. Slow had been appointed colonel a few months before Paul's promotion. Slow announced that the best way to protect the fort was to defeat the Confederates before they ever reached it. He left Fort Union determined to engage the enemy in Santa Fe. The Confederates, meanwhile, remained intent on their next battle being for possession of Fort Union. Sibley's assumption that the Army could live off the land had proved itself wrong, the locals not as welcoming as he had expected. At Albuquerque, Sibley's forces split to spread out the need for forage. Their goal, to meet on the other side of Glorieta Pass and take Fort Union and all of its supplies. When a patrol of Union troops who spent the night at Kozlowski's ranch on their way to Santa Fe ran into a Confederate scouting party that had left their campsite at Johnson's ranch, the stage was set for the battle to begin. The Battle of Glorieta Pass might have ended very differently had it not been for two guides. Manuel Antonio Chavez, a lieutenant colonel in the 2nd New Mexico Volunteers, was a legend in his own time, his courage so great that he was nicknamed El Leoncito, the Little Lion. While Slow was battling the Confederates at Pigeons Ranch, Chavez guided Major Chivington's forces out of the pass and over a rugged mesa top, allowing Chivington's troops to destroy the Confederate supply train at Johnson's ranch. But as night fell and a snowstorm blew in, Chivington's men got lost on their return over the mesa. They might have frozen to death had not a figure appeared out of the darkness, riding a magnificent white horse. It was this man, Father Alexander Grzelkowski, who was known as Padre Polacco, the Polish priest, and he guided the men back to Kozlowski's ranch and safety. Hi, I'm Jennifer Bonhoff, author of Valverde and Glorieta. I hope you enjoyed this little video on the characters who were at the Battle of Glorieta, and I hope you learned something too. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to my website. The blog has a lot of information on characters and on places. If you use the search bar, you can probably find something that you'd like. Thank you for listening.